Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Vince.
And today we have a special guest.
I'm the real Manos.
Yes, indeed. And Vince and I are in separate places again, so forgive the audio quality. We're chatting over Skype because Vince and I are kind of landlocked because it's all crazy icy outside. So we thought it would be fun to do a Skype podcast and bring in the real Manos. And Manos, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about writing. It seems like that's something we all three do. And it just kind of dawned on us that maybe we should discuss it a little bit.
And specifically, we thought we would talk about writing as it pertains to titles, and how you choose titles and what they have to say and do with the thing that you're writing. And I don't know. Some people have given me flack over the many months we've been on YouTube for making too big of a deal out of titles. Where I will complain sometimes on Rewind that a title doesn't fit with a movie. And I don't know, I take more stock in titles than some people do, and I don't know, I love them. So, Manos, the first thing I want to ask you is, do you begin with a title when you write a story, or does the title come later?
That depends, I think, on the individual story. Sometimes the title does come first for me. So a lot of times, a lot of my stories, actually, the title is the title character, which helps me write a lot. And also
I've never done that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I don't think I've ever done that.
I do that a lot, and I feel like it helps bring out the individuality of the story. Because I hate titles that could be about anything.
Me too.
Where the title is about, it's torment or something like that, or extreme likeliness. Yeah, I just don't.
Vince, did you just say The Ship?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, there's a DS9 episode called that.
Yeah, and there was a movie that just came out, the Ben Affleck film that came out called The Town.
Fighting. I'm telling you, I agree.
Fighting. Oh, yeah, Fighting is a terrible title.
Vince made fun. Vince, I think, did a rant on the podcast about Fighting when it came out.
That's true.
I said something to the effect of the next movie is going to be walking and then sleeping and then jumping.
And then driving.
What I always said about Batman Begins, I mean, I always thought that, it's a brilliant film, but at first I always thought the title sounded really silly, and I was like, the sequel's going to be Batman Keeps Going.
Batman takes a day at the store.
Batman takes a break.
There should be a series of children's books.
Bane takes a bat break.
But I also, I've also been... Getting back to topic, I've actually sometimes have been unable to write a story because I can't find a title. That's prevented a couple of stories here and there from really getting any ground.
Wow.
Because I take it seriously. Because the title, I'm thinking you're going to probably get into this deeper, but I think the title has a lot to do with coloring a person's perceptions about what they're going to be reading.
Oh, yeah.
It helps create tone. Yeah. And if you start out with something boring, that will make people think maybe it is boring. And also, it also can make something forgettable. I mean, we were just talking about Blackula on the yearbook.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people who haven't seen the movie have heard of Blackula because it's such a memorable title.
Mm-hmm. I like Blackula. I watched it on title alone, and I suppose that's not true. I heard about the whole blaxploitation thing, and I thought, let's give this a shot. Now, if I'm going to start anywhere, why not Blackula?
That's right.
When I was in high school, I used to always start with a title, and I felt like I had to. I was like, I have to come up with a cool title and then write a story based on it. And I have learned over the years to write titles last, and I've done that more and more as time's gone on, where I've made it a lot more about a character, and then I'll have a working title sometimes, but a lot of the time these days I don't even really have a title till the end. My book didn't have a final title until I self-published it. And it had a working title forever. It was The Seven for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to learn how to not be in love with a title.
Yeah.
As opposed to being the 5 for about 7 years.
Well, and honestly, a lot of the reason I decided to change the title was because too many movies came out with the word 7 in them.
Like 7 was my.
And just and not just 7, but also like just numbers became too big of a deal. I mean, we had 2 movies called 9 that came out the same year. One spelled out 9 and one just the number 9, and they were 2 entirely different movies. One was a musical, I think. Yeah. But so the thing is, like you're saying, Manos, I felt like I needed to come up with something that stood better on its own and didn't feel, sound like a million other things you've heard of.
So to get away from using numbers, you called your book "Normal as a 4-letter word."
Almost got it.
No, I was getting away from it. Thanks, Vince. No, I was just getting away from it being a number. You know what I mean? Just as the title. But anyway, yeah. What was really irritating too is after I did that, I did some. Of course, I didn't do this research until after I had already published it. I looked around and discovered just the sheer number of books called "Something is a 4-letter word," and it was kind of depressing. But anyway.
But it's a good title. I mean, part of what I think makes also a memorable title is something that can be referenced later on or even parodied. If that makes any sense, where people could just take a word out and maybe attach it to whatever they're talking about and use it as sort of reference. I mean, you can't do that with a title like The Town or something like that, or Fighting.
Because then somebody in the movie has to go, but that means you'll be spending all your time fighting.
Yeah, exactly.
Town.
Hey, let me ask you guys this question now that you've gotten on that, Vince. Does it bug you guys when people feel the need to blatantly put the title in a line of dialogue?
Yes. No, it depends. Is it clever? Is it comedic? Like, for example, I know this isn't the title, but in The Incredible Hulk, which I liked, but when they got to the part when they talked about Abomination, they had a character stop and go, "You can't do that. That would be an abomination." And I thought, did we even need to say abomination? I mean, you call him abomination.
It's such a word that just flies off the tongue all the time with everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Like all those years ago, people just say it in everyday speech. I was just talking to my mom all those years ago.
This dinner is an abomination, Mother.
Well, that's something that we're seeing a lot with superhero movies, though, just because they're trying to be, air quotes, realistic, so they don't want to actually call some of these characters the names that we know them by, but they also want to get that in there because they feel like, it's supposed to for the fans. And let's face it, a lot of us were pretty angry that the word Venom showed up nowhere in Spider-Man 3, so fair enough.
It didn't?
Yeah.
I hated the movie enough that I didn't care, I guess.
There is no Venom anywhere in Spider-Man 3.
No, you're absolutely right about that. Venom is not.
But they even did it with Iron Man 2, when Iron Man's like, "Oh, you want to be the War Machine? Take your best shot." And I wasn't sure about that.
Well, hopefully in the next one he's called War Machine. Like, maybe that's the name. Like, maybe,
that's the origin of the name?
Yeah, maybe Rhodey heard that and go, hey, that's kind of catchy.
That sounds really good.
Thematically, I think it fits with the movie. I mean, Tony Stark trying not to be the War Machine by developing weapons, so it's interesting to me.
Yeah, and, that makes it. I guess that makes it sound better than the Abomination thing. But
the Abomination thing, it was very stilted. I mean, I think when you get to if something feels natural, I think that it can be accepted. But if something feels forced, then obviously it's forced. And why did you bother to put it in there in the first place?
What I really like when it can be done, and this is easier to do in titles of episodes of TV and stuff, but when you have a title that works on multiple levels, especially if you have multiple subplots, so that the title is like the thing that holds it all together. So it means this one obvious thing on the surface, but then there's this other underlying thing that it also means. And double meanings with titles is really cool when you can pull it off. It's not easy, but it's awesome.
That's one of the things I always liked about trying to make titles. I would never start with a title first unless I came up with a character that spawned a title. But I suppose that's technically not starting with the title. Anyway, but always thought starting with a title was problematic for me because I would always focus on the title itself, saying, well, what story could I extrapolate from this title? And the best titles I've come up with have been things that were thematically spawned from the piece itself. Yeah, I killed the conversation.
See, Vince, I keep telling you not to say profound things.
I know.
Because when you do that, then there's like nothing to say because we're thinking.
Right, I can't keep up with my puzzler hurting.
Well, I'll say this. I think that a title being said within, like we've talked about, I suppose I've talked about the whole abomination thing, but the idea of using the title at the beginning. Wait, I'm going nowhere with my speech, but my talking is broken. But like, okay, I'll say this. I wrote a one-act play, and the title was said in the play within the first 2 minutes of the play.
Yeah.
And I got a pretty good response from this. It was staged at Ottawa University, and people really seemed to enjoy it. But when I really looked at it, I thought the title was just so bland by itself. Like, if you saw the play and you looked at the title, you'd say, oh, that's clever and funny, I get it. But if you just saw the play title, you probably wouldn't want to go see the play or read the play.
Oh, something I also enjoy. You mentioned you wrote a play. I wrote a play in high school, and it was a sort of sitcom-ish kind of play about these teachers, and the whole action goes on in the break room of this high school, and the play is called Between Bells, and I really enjoyed that. First off, it had a nice rhythm to it. And I thought it explained, what the play was basically about. I also like, I guess it's called double alliteration. I like that about the title there. And I do this with character names as well as titles. Is I try to have something roll off the tongue very easily. If something's kind of awkward, I think it hurts your character or your title. Because if it's something tricky to say, maybe you're a little kind of put off by it. I don't know that, and I think that influence, frankly, comes from Stan Lee a lot. Because if you notice, a lot of his characters have that kind of feeling to them, like Bruce Banner and Peter Parker and Reed Richards. And Scott
Summers.
He
always said that he did that just because he could remember them.
Yeah, and I think that. I think that also goes to, you can extend that to people remembering them. I also think about, this may be like a weird comparison, but also Marilyn Manson was talking about how he came up with this name. And he said, he talked about, picking, of course, the killer Charles Manson and Marilyn Monroe, but he also said when he put the names together, he described it almost, it had this kind of abracadabra kind of roll to it. And he knew he had a great name that he put together. And I think that's a kind of good method. I mean,
I was in a creative writing course that made us do that. Like he said, come up with things that start with 2 Ds.
Uh-huh.
And, so a lot of us came up with things that started with 2 Ds. And one guy, and this has been in my head since 2004. I'd never heard of this movie until that point, but I've never forgotten it. Debbie Does Dallas. It's now stuck in my head because of that class. And
I would say Daredevil, but
I'm not sure where I was going with that whole thing, but no, things are catchy. If you have something that's catchy, then it'll stick in your mind, and you'll remember it. You'll want to see it. At some point you'll think, well, granted, I'll admit I still haven't seen Debbie Does Dallas, but I think there's a good reason for that.
I think that titles can be poetic, and I think that if I think I would go as far as to say this is maybe looking too deeply into this, but I think you could almost go as far as to say that if titles have any kind of a form, it's poetry, because there are really short lines of poems. There are also really long titles. And so, you can have titles that sound really poetic, like they're almost a poem of themselves, or like a start of a poem. And if you look, people a lot of times remember, original series Star Trek episode titles because they sound really poetic. And in fact, 3, if not 4 of them are lines out of Shakespeare. That's not an accident.
Hey, have you noticed how much shorter titles are these days, specifically for film? Because when I watch old, like, science fiction movies, or, horror too, but the titles always seem to be almost a sentence in that regard. Like, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right.
You compare that to, films nowadays, like, like Stargate or something like that. I mean, there's, I don't know,
what would you prefer on maybe your piece or somebody else's piece, whatever it happens to be, but do you prefer longer titles or shorter ones?
I'd be honest, I prefer shorter titles. For the most part. I've occasionally written things that have, like, maybe at the most 3 to 4 words. But if it has a good kind of feeling to it, I'll go longer. I usually, when I write subtitles, like episodes of series, then I can kind of play around with it. I feel like I have more freedom.
Yeah, I never really thought about it until just now, but I guess I've written mostly really short titles also. And I guess I just kind of gravitated toward that. I'm not sure why. Maybe the deal is when I would think of longer titles, they always felt like subtitles. Because, again with my book, normal is a 4-letter word. That used to be the subtitle of that book, and now it's the title. It used to be the 7 was going to be the overarching thing for the two books, because there's going to be a sequel. And then each one was going to have a subtitle, and now it's just the subtitles. I wrote a novella several years ago called The Figment. So I guess I've mostly had 1 and 2 word titles also.
Yeah.
Except for some short stories. I wanted to bring this up too because I used to get flack from professors in college for writing titles that they consider to be trite. And of course, I tried to keep cliches and trite things out of, the stories themselves. That's what, you try to do that. But sometimes, I always felt, and you guys tell me what you think about this, sometimes I found that if you used, a phrase that, or a sentence that people were familiar with, it could be clever within the context of your piece. And I couldn't get professors in college to jump on this idea, and it just seemed like the rule was always if it's trite at all, you can't use it. And let me give you my example of what I did. I did a short story about a guy who was going to a toy store because he thought he was too stolid and he was trying to learn how to be a kid again because he never really had a childhood, and he was this 40-year-old guy. And one of the first things that he goes to a toy store and he keeps buying things trying to learn how to be a kid. And one of the first things he buys is a Magic 8-Ball. So I titled the story originally Outlook Not So Good.
Oh, I kind of like that.
Is what I called it, and I thought it was cool. And the teacher was like, "No, you have to change that. It's trite."
I would not have done well with this guy. A lot of my titles, especially, I'm working on sort of the next year of stories for the Red Knight comic that I'm working right now. I have at least the first 12 issues kind of plotted, and I have them all titled. And he would have not liked, I don't think, any of them. Because I have one where issue 4 is about a mad scientist story. And it's called Me Madman, You Sane.
But I think comic book titles are kind of different.
I feel like they should have fun. And you know what? I got to tell you, it does seem like modern comic books don't seem to have any fun with the titles anymore. They always seem so serious. And that
I have a question about that.
A lot of them seem to be kind of old titles too, though. Like I saw one today. Like the next issue of Action is going to be Ghost in the Machine. Like, how many comic books have you read called Ghost in the Machine?
Only 50 billion.
Exactly. Yeah, tons of them.
And I have no problem going, as silly as I feel like, with some titles, as long as it's not too serious of a story.
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
have some fun with it.
Vince, what was your question? Sorry.
Oh, I was just trying to make a joke without actually saying it. Why so serious?
That bothered me. That was action also. And when they did a Joker story with Lex, the issue prior to that, when they were advertising for it at the end, they said next, why so serious? And I was like, no.
Did you cast Heath Ledger on a comic book? How'd that happen?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like that's a phrase that goes with a particular version of that character.
Mm-hmm.
I think I ranted about it, but anyway.
Well, I mean, the Joker's that way. I mean, I remember a Justice League issue where he made an appearance. He looked exactly like the Nicholson version, and this was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was it came out the same year, I think, as the Tim Burton movie, and he really did. He looked a lot like the Nicholson Joker. So I don't know. That's how it goes. I remember when Lois and Clark premiered too. This is kind of getting off titles though, but I mean,
that's all right.
When Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman,
we can talk about that title.
Yeah, which I thought that was a pretty funny title. But I remember they redesigned Lois to look like Terry Hatcher, and they completely redid his parents. Actually, Ma and Pa Kent were a lot like more hipper old people than the way John Byrne used to draw them.
Well, and I actually loved the way they did those characters in that show. The thing that I always thought was weird was that because they were, again, this is off topic, but because they were supposed to be like main cast members, they had to get them in every episode. But I mean, they didn't live in Metropolis, so it was usually with a phone call. It was just every episode they're on the phone.
Well, as opposed to the current Superman show, where the title doesn't live in Metropolis.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that too. There were a lot of fans about midway through when Clark was constantly in Metropolis, but he still lived in Smallville, where people were saying, why don't we just change the name of the show to Metropolis? And I was actually all for that.
It's a German movie and they think good.
Oh, they think it was a good show because
they're like, this is German, right? This is awesome.
Oh yeah, this is 1929 Metropolis. No,
unfortunately, the dialogue in Smallville isn't as good as the old film.
No, I get it. Sorry, you totally caught me off guard when you said that.
Well, thank you. That's what I try to do.
That was really good. Yeah, I mean, like. It seemed early on in that show, I mean, not to talk too much about Smallville, but it seemed like early on in the show they were making such a big deal out of the title, like it's in Smallville, so we have to stay in Smallville, that they kept, like whoever was running Luthor Corp was always in that mansion, in Smallville. And so, even season 6, Lex and Clark, they are not friends. They hate each other. There's no reason for Lex to there's nothing keeping Lex in Smallville. Luthor Corp has a tower in Metropolis, and he's still running everything from Smallville because A, it's called Smallville, and B, they've got a standing set they have to use.
Yay.
Yeah.
So yeah, titles can be problematic when you landlock yourself.
Mm-hmm. And that goes to the common issue that they should have just changed the show.
Yeah.
When it got halfway through.
Or they should have just stopped making a crappy show. That might have been good too.
Well, hey, that's obviously,
That's the obvious choice, but they're not going to do that. I got a question. You guys have any favorite titles?
Kill Bill. I love that title.
I hated those movies. I couldn't stand them.
This is what I disagree with, but I love the films, and I love what's the film about? Oh, someone wants to kill Bill. I mean, it explains the movie, what you're going to go see. It's got a rhythm to it. It's almost like someone being punched, left, right, kill Bill.
I'm not going to disagree. The title is kind of catchy.
Mm-hmm.
I always prefer those long titles. I don't know.
This is going to be obvious coming from me, but it's just the first thing that pops in my head. Wrath of Khan. What a good title.
That is a good title.
Like you don't have to know who Khan is to want to know what the Wrath is about. I mean, Wrath is a great name, and it just goes. I mean, it almost rhymes. You know, it's a slant rhyme,
Mm-hmm.
and so it just sounds good.
And of course, old school fans know that. Oh boy, Khan's coming back, and he's somewhat annoyed.
I would make the argument. He's probably more than somewhat. He's got a wrath.
Mildly perturbed.
I would make the argument that the title has something to do with why that film is so popular inside of science fiction canon. Mm-hmm. Because yeah, like you said, I mean, you know, old school TOS fans would be like, "Oh, cool, Khan," but I mean, like, you know, everybody saw that movie.
Yeah, you know, if Rick Berman had made that film, it would have been called "An Angry Email Sent from Khan."
Yeah, exactly.
But I kid, Rick Berman.
Well, hey, we're nearly out of time. Do you guys have any final thoughts on titles?
Yeah, some of my favorite titles.
Yeah, go ahead, Vince.
Still sounds good. You know, I haven't seen the movie actually, but Curious Case of Benjamin Button, I always thought that was a great title. Things like that. A Series of Unfortunate Events. I don't know. I thought those were really neat. I like the long, I guess.
That's not a bad film.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
What a great title.
Have you seen that
Texas
film?
Chainsaw.
It's also a brilliant film, yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie.
It is a good movie.
And sometimes, you know...
Stranger Than Fiction.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes a film can come along with a title that adds a word to the lexicon, like arachnophobia. It's not a great film, but more people got familiar with the term.
Well, are you guys good? Is that everything?
Yeah, that's all I got at the moment.
All right, cool. Well, hey, thanks everybody for listening to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. Thanks to our special guest, the real Manos.
Thank you for having me.
Sure, absolutely. It was fun. And we'll see everybody once again next week. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince.
And thanks again for listening. Oh, sorry, Manos. Would you like to say that you're Manos? Yeah, I could decide either. Well, anyway, thanks for listening. See you later.